Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. Today's video is going to be on a Global War 1936 to 1945 expansion set, and this one is East versus West. This is a really good expansion set, and it's really quite a large one too, although it's not that difficult to play it. But specifically, we're going to be playing the East versus West version 2. Now, all of the expansion sets, all the ones over the years that they've done, they're updating into version 3 rules, but we're not going to worry about version 3 today. Today is all about version 2 of East versus West. First of all, let's take a look at what you get with the set if you purchase it. So there's not one price for purchasing everything, right? Let me just show you here. I'm going to set the camera down. You'll see now there's an overlay here. You can see, like, this doesn't normally look like Europe, does it? So that overlay is, it's only for one of the scenarios, and that's Operation Pluto. And that's assuming that the war ended the way that it did, you know, where historically where the Allies won the war there. So that's why you don't see any Germans in there, right? Because the Germans, the armies have all been disbanded and everything, and this scenario will start a year after the war ended. This is Operation Pluto. Operation Unthinkable, on the other hand, which is another way that you can play this game, is the opposite, where it starts in 1945, and the aggressors to that will be the Allies. In Pluto here, the aggressors, the nation that starts the war, will be the Russians. And then there's also another scenario that you can play, and that's assuming that the Axis won the war. And so it's going to be Germany against Japan. In all three of these scenarios, you can play, well, actually not Pluto. Pluto you can't play at the end of your 36 game. But the other ones you can play at the end of the 36 game, just carrying on. Like, these are the conditions. Okay, so these are your options, and carrying it on. Those three scenarios that I gave you are just three of the scenarios. There's more, but those three scenarios that I gave you are the only ones that come with setups where you can actually start a game just like this. Like, I didn't play a game earlier. There's three different setups: one for Unthinkable, one for the Axis split, and one for this one, Pluto, which I've got set up on the board right now. And so you can purchase the overlay there for Operation Pluto. You can purchase the nuclear set, and not all of the markers are here because some of them are on the board right now, right? In the setup. And then also what else? Oh, I know. These communist roundels, the CCP roundels, because that's not something that you would normally get, right? Like, you would get these roundels here, the nationalist Chinese roundels, in your Axis and Allies game, but these ones you'd have to purchase. So there's an option to purchase 20 of those. And then the other thing that you get for a free download, you get the rules, not in a book. I put that in a book myself. And this is the setup card. I made up 2 of these setup cards and laminated them. And then the last thing is this diplomacy chart here. And there's 1945 on one side. It looks like the diplomacy expansion, doesn't it? But this is 1945 and 1946 on the other side. But we'll get to that chart later. Let me just walk around the board and show you more of this Pluto setup while I talk here. So this set's made up by a friend of mine from Pennsylvania. He's a retired colonel from the United States military. And he's right into this kind of thing, into developing games and designing games, and his brain thinks like that. Believe me, I've known the guy for a while, and he's a really, really good guy. His first work that he did with HBG was the game Operation Unthinkable. Now, you might have come across that on the HBG website. There's an actual map that you can get, and the game is called Operation Unthinkable. Anyway, Robert designed that game, and so he was the natural choice to do this, because one of the scenarios is Operation Unthinkable, and of course the other ones are similar, right? what happens at the end of World War II. And he's done a lot of research on that, and so he was the one that came up with the rules. Now, I encourage you to watch this video if you're just starting it now and you've played it already. Maybe you bought it. I encourage you to watch this video because there's going to be changes. Here, take a look at this. So there's changes because you probably had some questions as you were reading through the rules. So did I. I had lots of questions, and Robert and I have been talking quite a bit over the last couple of weeks now. We've been burning up the phone lines and texting and emailing and getting clarifications. And as those clarifications came, I'd have more questions. And so he realized, well, I guess there's not a rule for that. So there's some rule changes in here, and there's some clarifications. And if you're still unclear after this video on how to play the East versus West expansion, then just leave a comment in like a question in the comment section of the video, down below the video there, and ask me. If I don't know the answer to it, then I'll get in touch with Robert, and he either knows the answer to that or he's got to make up a new rule just for you, right? Which is okay. Anyway, so I think that's about it. So let's just get into this now. Okay, so here we are, and we're going to get into it. One of the things that I noticed right away here is you need 20 partisans for the Russians and for the CCP. And they're in the partisan set, like it's recommended that you use the partisan set for this rule set. And we'll get into that later. We're talking about the partisans, but they don't give you enough of those partisans. And so I've spoken with Doug about that, and we'll see if maybe that's one more thing that can get added into the kind of the things that you can purchase is an extra 10 Russian partisans, because it seems you're going to need more to play this game. One of the things that you notice right away with the setups is that you need more units, definitely. Like for Operation Pluto, you need more Russians because Russia's become a big power, right? Including naval, and you're not used to collecting a lot of Russian boats, but just like, for instance, the submarines, there's 22 of them, right? But in the base game of the 36, there's not much of a chance for the KMT or the CCP to become a big player in the game, right? Or a major power. But in this game, as you carry on, then there's much more of a chance, because once the Japanese are eliminated, then the Civil War resumes, right? And so you might very well have a result in the Civil War. So you're going to need more CCP units and more KMT units if you haven't built a sufficient army for that. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the scenarios here, but I'm not going to dig into them too much right now, because I'm going to make more videos after this. Like I'm going to do an Operation Pluto video of its own, right? And I'm actually going to play the game and everything, and check in with you once in a while and show you what's going on. But what we're doing in this video today is just giving you the rules for all of the games, because there's a base set of rules to play these. So the first one is, as I mentioned, it's Operation Pluto. It's in 1946. It's a USSR surprise attack on the Western Allies. And then there's Operation Unthinkable. And you can play that if Berlin is captured and Germany's income is below 20 IPP. That's at the end of your game. But again, like, this also has its own setup charts. If you wanted to play this one as a standalone game, you could. So what that is it's a Western Allied surprise attack on USSR. The USSR must attack Japan. And again, like, there's the option of the historical setup. Then there's another one. It's a truce between Germany and the USSR. So if Germany holds Berlin and two cities, the Leningrad, Stalingrad, Moscow, like two of those three, then you can play the truce between Germany and the USSR. And it says USSR must declare war on the Western Allies and or Japan. And it can be combined with the next scenario, which is a truce between, not the next one, this one down here, a truce between Japan and the Western Allies. So Japan holds Tokyo and two cities, Calcutta, Sydney, Nanking, one of those, or two of those three cities. And then Japan must declare war on the USSR. So you could have both of those truces happening at the same time and have a game like that depending on if your game ended like that, right? There's no setups to start these ones from scratch. These are ones that you would have to play at the end of your 36 game. So then there's one more. There's the truce between Germany and the Western Allies, and that's if Germany holds Berlin, Warsaw, and Paris. Then the USSR declare war on the Western Allies and Japan. And then the last one, which would be really interesting, I think. I'm definitely going to do a video on this one. It's Axis split. And so that's Germany holds Berlin and 4 of these cities: Leningrad, Stalingrad, Moscow, Warsaw, Paris, while Japan hold Tokyo and 2 of either Calcutta, Sydney, and Nanking. So basically, the Axis have won the war, and then it's a fight between Japan and Germany. And there is a setup for that as well. Like, you can start that game and just play that game as a standalone game. And so when I'm talking about truces, let me just tell you here. So a truce between 2 combatants is unbreakable until one of those combatant countries captures a capital of another major country. So they give you an example here. So in the German-Western Alliance truce scenario, the truce Germany and Italy have within the Western Allies will not be broken unless they capture Moscow or the Western Allies capture Tokyo. The creation of a second capital by some nations does not inhibit this renewal of conflicts. So when in truce, all combat between the major countries and minor powers and colonies will cease. Major powers at truce will not allow each other to pass through or overfly any of their territories. So basically, you treat the people that you have a truce with like neutral countries. You can't fly over them, you can't walk through them, you can't occupy the same territories. I would imagine you could occupy the same sea zones, though, because sea zones are something that are not owned, right? So that shouldn't put you at combat unless you were on opposite sides in a sea zone, right? And then Free French and Vichy French will merge as one nation if they have not already done so. So no matter what scenario you're playing, you're going to do that. And they have rules here that we're going to get into regarding the Chinese Civil War and the Japanese surrender. It talks about the partisan and diplomacy rules. And also it says that you adhere to the Global War 1936 rules. So if you're looking for a rule in here and it's not stated in this book, and I haven't stated it for you, then just go to the 1936 rules, use their mechanics and everything. That should be good enough, right? Like, just refer to those rules. Anyway, I'm not going to go through these. Like, you see, they expand on all the different scenarios. There's a whole page just for Pluto and 2 whole pages for Unthinkable. I'm not going to do that because this video will go 2 hours long if I do that. I am just going to go to the next part of the base rules here. Okay, the first thing that we're going to talk about is Asia, because Asia is something where they're planning on resuming the Chinese Civil War. So what's that going to look like? Because Japan could own just about all of China, and then what happens then if Japan surrenders, right? If they haven't already surrendered yet. Like in Pluto, Japan has already surrendered, so what I'm about to talk about with the Japan surrenders isn't going to apply because there's no Japanese units on the board. But let's say you're playing one of the other scenarios and Japan has surrendered, okay? First of all, let's take a look. There's something here, and it's the first change that I mentioned earlier. There were some changes and some clarifications. So here, it did say in the rules here, in the 4 territories of Manchuria, the CCP, blah, blah, blah. So that should say in the 3 territories of Manchuria, okay? Because you look here, there's Northern Manchuria, Eastern Manchuria, Western Manchuria. Before, they might have been thinking about J-Hall here, but that's not part of this, okay? A part of this rule right here, because traditionally that went to, and historically that went to the nationalist Chinese, not the communist. Colonel Bob actually gave me a history lesson on that one. So anyway, like the Americans, they actually airlifted the nationalist Chinese into J-Hall there. when it fell, so that they would have they would own that province. But anyway, that's the first change that you're going to find me talk about today. So in the 3 territories of Manchuria, the CCP will gain 1 infantry for every 2 Japanese infantry and 1 artillery for every 2 Japanese artillery remaining at surrender. So that's within each territory, right? You don't add all the infantry up and then say, okay, there's this many, and you do that. It's like if there's 2 Japanese infantry in here, then you would take them off, put 1 CCP infantry there. If there were 2 artillery, then you would take them off, put 1 CCP artillery on, and that's per territory, right? Then also, if any of the territories at the time of the Japanese surrender are occupied by the USSR, then you would put 3 CCP infantry in that territory, and then the USSR must withdraw at their earliest convenience. Like when it's Russia's turn, they're going to take the units out of China, right? For each territory that the Russians own, though, that will become 3 CCP units. So the next one is in Hainan, Formosa, and Jehol, the KMT will gain 1 infantry for every 2 Japanese and 1 artillery for every 2 Japanese artillery. So same rules, right? Like for the CCP, it was the 3 Manchurian territories here, right? And for the KMT, it's Jehol and Formosa and Hainan. So if there's Japanese troops in there, in those 3 territories, you will convert those into KMT troops, okay? And then you place 1 US infantry in Korea here, and then you remove all the Japanese roundels from all locations in China, returning control to the KMT, except for Communist China, which will be CCP control. So this will become CCP. All the other ones will become KMT, except for, of course, these Manchurian ones. If you had placed the if Japan had units on there and you replaced them, right? So outside of the Japanese home islands, up to half of the infantry and artillery may be converted by purchasing them at full price by the US, FEC, France, or ANZAC, and changing the units to national unit representation. So the players will all decide amongst themselves, like say there's 3 people playing the Allies. Well, then you guys will have to go outside and duke it out or do whatever you're going to do. But this is what it's going to look like. So we're outside of the Japanese home island here, right? And Japan owns, what is that, New Guinea there? Dutch New Guinea, yeah. So they have 2 infantry, 2 artillery, a tank, and they've got some boats there. So the Anzac guy comes back in from outside there with a black eye after beating up the American and the British player, and they've decided that Anzac gets to take this territory here. So what happens is the stuff that you can't convert, you must take off. Like you don't get the tank, you don't get any of the boats, right, outside of the Japanese homeland. But you can convert the infantry and the artillery. So 2 for every 1, right? So one infantry for those 2, 1 artillery for those 2. And because Anzac has taken this now, you would take the Japanese roundel off and you would place the Anzac roundel on and adjust the Anzac income up by 1. So that's how it works, and that's how it's going to work everywhere except for the Japanese homeland and China. So anywhere else Japan owns anything, that's how you're going to resolve it, okay? So then there's the Japanese homeland, I believe, is next. So in the home islands and water, so the water surrounding Japan as well, there's 2 sea zones there. All Japanese land, air, and sea forces are available for U.S. purchase and conversion to U.S. units. All infrastructure, so that's your factories, your bases of all kinds, right? They remain in their current condition. So if you, for instance, had this air base had 3 points of damage on it, then the USA would take over the air base, and there would still be 3 points of damage. If there was no damage on any of the facilities, then they get all those facilities undamaged. It just depends, you know, like on, but they will get all the facilities. And if they're majors, then there will be major facilities as well. So this might be what it looks like afterwards, except for the British guy there. You know, like depending on what Japan had on there. The U.S. can buy any of the units, right? Planes, trains, and automobiles. Like they can buy all of them, right? If they want. And the facilities they get for free. Now the boats, any Japanese boats that are in the water surrounding Japan, the U.S. also has the option of purchasing the boats and the planes that are in the water here. So they could decide to, you know, they had enough money to purchase the carrier, but not the planes. Well, the planes that come off the board, but you would put a U.S. carrier on. You know, the transport carrier or cruiser, same thing, right? But only the U.S. can buy them. The ANZAC can't say, well, if you don't want them, I'll take them. It doesn't work that way. Only the U.S. gets the stuff in the home island or surrounding waters in Japan. So the purchase is immediate and takes place during the place units and collect income phase at the end of the player's turn that caused the Japanese surrender. But you can collect your income first. Like you don't have to save money hoping that you take Japan. It says that it can be taken from the collected income. Oh, taken from the collected income. I think that means taken from the Japanese income that you collect, and your collected income from, like say the Americans took it over. So the American income and the money that they actually no, they wouldn't get the Japanese money. That's something else you'll see later on. But the rules of 36 apply, so the Americans wouldn't get the Japanese income in that case, unless you'll see later. So the Allies and the USSR must evacuate all units from Chinese territories, Hainan and Formosa. Any units not moved by normal means at the end of the next turn will be removed from the game. So if you're in the middle of China there and you can't make it out, you know, like your little legs won't carry you fast enough, then you're dead. The Chinese just took you out. So anyway, that is what happens in the Japanese surrender. Let's get to the Chinese Civil War next. All right, the Chinese Civil War. So like I was saying earlier, the Chinese Civil War is the same as the Chinese Civil War in version 36 of the rules. It's just you're actually going to fight it out. Like when it was me playing the game before, I always thought, why bother fighting it out? Japan's just going to come in and clean up, you know. But in this case here, where you're resuming the Chinese Civil War after Japan falls, then why not? Like you can just go to town on the other guy, right? You don't have to worry about anything else because neither side, the CCP or the KMT, are allowed to declare war on anybody outside of China, right? They can only fight each other. And conversely, nobody outside of China can take part in the Chinese Civil War. They can't declare war on either side. The Russians can't help the CCP. The Americans can't help the KMT. You can't lend lease. So in that respect, that's a little bit different from the 36 base rules. When you have the resumption of the Civil War, is that everybody else stays out of it. And so it's just the two of you fighting it out, right? And so to win that Civil War, you must become a major power. And by becoming a major power, what that means for the Chinese, right, is owning all of China's mainland. And that includes Manchuria here, right? Doesn't include Korea, but it includes Manchuria and all of the Chinese mainland. Does not include Hainan or Formosa. Those are islands. So once you do that, you become a major power and you win the Civil War. Even if, like if the CCP were to do that and the KMT still had a guy over on Formosa, you've still won the Civil War. That guy on Formosa just stays there, right? So you can't build or improve a factory, the guys. But like here, there was a factory that the Japanese owned. So if you take over a factory, you can use it. You can't improve it. So you could build units that aren't infantry. Like you're allowed to build the units that you're normally allowed to build, right? I think if the Burma Road is open, which it is, then I think you're allowed to build artillery, right? And isn't it if the CCP are bordering Russia, which they are, then you could build artillery for them. So basically, you're fighting it out between infantry, artillery, and I believe cavalry, right? And so, but if somebody has a factory, then they can also buy other things, right? From their build chart. And you see on their cards, they have a build chart of their own, right? Where am I? It says here, USSR capture of territories in China or Manchuria will be liberation income. So, at the end of the Civil War, like say the KMT one, when USSR goes and attacks the KMT, if they were to take these two territories here, those would become CCP territories, not Russian territories. So you would put their roundel on there. Basically, what you're doing is liberating them. And the same with the Allies. Like if the CCP won, and so you're allowed to attack China now, then as you attack China, then those territories become part of the KMT as a liberation. They don't become your territories. Like the FEC wouldn't get the income for them. The KMT would get the income for them when you liberate them. Partisans. So the CCP partisans are disbanded at the end of the Civil War if the CCP wins. CCP partisans will continue to populate if the KMT wins the Civil War. And then at the conclusion of the war, either side can join the global war by declaring war on the Comintern or Allies. So the KMT would declare war on the Comintern and the CCP would declare war on the Allies. But neither of them can research technology until they become a major power. In other words, until they take over all of mainland China. That's when they become a major power. Then they could research technology. But really, I mean, you would think that that's very, very late in the game. And to start researching technology, knowing that you'd have to roll the dice successfully 4 times, that might not be a great idea. But you can do it, though. Anyway, that's what happens in Asia. So let's get to the technology next. Now in this East versus West expansion set, there are 5 new technologies. The first one is the one that you're probably most interested in. I know I am, and that's the atom bomb. And so these are the markers that you need to play that, right? And I'm going to explain to you what each one of them is and how much they cost and how you use them and all that, okay? So first of all, there's the research marker here. Now, you're going to want to pay attention to all this because this is where all the major changes and clarifications are coming in is during this technology phase here, because this is where I had a lot of questions. So this marker here, like I asked Bob, I said, so can I just pick that marker up and take it wherever I want, like I own that technology now? And he said, no. What this is, and it doesn't say in the rules, and so what this is a nuclear research facility. They just give you that marker. And so what I've decided to do is you see this piece here, a lot of people have seen these before. I'm going to use these myself for a nuclear research facility. You can get yourself a facility if you want. It's up to you. You can just use the marker, that's fine too. So I'm going to use this. And you can see here there's, for instance, there's one in Moscow there. So it starts the game with one in Moscow. And actually it starts the game with 4 of them. There's one in Appalachia, one in San Francisco, one in Moscow, and one in Berlin. So those first 2 that I mentioned, they're in the United States. And then Moscow, and then in Berlin, that one there could be contested, right? Like there's, it's right on the border of where the fight is. Anyway, so they're facilities. Now, next question I had is what if you conquered it, right? Like here, the British are here, right? And here are the Russians, and here is the facility right here, the research facility. Now, it costs you 30 IPP to purchase a research facility, right? Big cost, and it should be, because, I mean, a nuclear bomb is a very powerful weapon, and you'll see as we go through these rules here. So my question was, well, if I took over this territory, then wouldn't I have it? Like, wouldn't I have stolen that research? And so anyway, getting back and forth with each other over a couple of days there, we kind of came up with what'll happen is that instead of 30 IPP, like if the British were to take Berlin there and take that facility, they could pay 10 IPP, and then they could have that facility like on the next turn. Not on the turn that they take it. Like they take over the territory, and then on the next turn, when they're purchasing their units, they could pay 10 IPP, and then they could do one of two things. They could keep this facility right here, which is probably not something I would do, or they could destroy that facility, and for that 10 IPP, say build it over here in London. Like that's probably what I would do, right? So you would just pick the marker up or pick up the thing that you have there, $10 and put it over here, right? So if you left it there though, then if the Russians wanted to take that back and they didn't have this one over here in Moscow, then they don't have what it takes to build a bomb. They can get that territory back if that thing is still there. Then they would have to pay 10 IPP in order to make this an active research facility here. Otherwise, it would still be, I guess, damaged or destroyed. You know, like if the Russians went in and took it back, right? But that's just in that case. Like it could be anywhere, a facility that somebody had built or whatever, right? So that's what happens if you do that. So what I'm going to do myself, like I use these cards here to put the money on and everything. I'm going to, like Russia has got the technology, America's got the technology, and those are the only two right now. So they already possess the technology, right? Nobody else does. And so if Britain goes and takes that, then they'll get a research marker and put it on their card as well, right? So that means that they'll have that technology, but they won't have the facility. They still have to have a facility in order to build a bomb, right? So the next thing is, let me just move this out of my way here, is you also need a nuclear reactor. Now, there's only one nuclear reactor starting on the board, and that's right here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. But you have to have that in order to build a nuclear bomb. So you have to have the research, you have to have the nuclear reactor, which costs 10 IPP. Now that is a facility. So like all facilities, it can be bombed strategically, right? And it can take up to 10 points of damage. If you have 10 points of damage on there, that destroys the facility. But like if you only had 8 points of damage, then you could pay that 8 IPP and then the facility would be active again. Now, if there's any damage on it whatsoever, like even 1 point of damage, then it's inoperable. So you can't build a nuclear bomb if your nuclear reactor has even 1 point of damage on it, okay? That should be pretty self-explanatory. And the same thing, the nuclear reactor has to be built in your home country. Like this one is in the home country of the United States, right? The Russians would have to build one in their home country. I don't believe that these spaces here, that even though they have the Russian roundel on them, I don't believe that these should be considered Russian home country. That's something that you could talk about with your playgroup. I think that the Russian home country should be the original Russian home country. Like these are captured territories. Even though you start with them at the start of the game, I would say myself, and when I play, I'm going to play where the Russian home country starts here at the edge of that thing there. So you would build your nuclear reactor somewhere. I mean, you got tons of space to build it, and plus you wouldn't want to build it over here anyway, right? Like you would want to put it back, you know, maybe back here in Ural, right? There's already a major factory there, and you'd be able to defend it pretty well, right? So the next thing is heavy water, and that's this marker here. There's 3 heavy water markers on the board. So there's this one here, and there's this one in Oslo, Norway, and then there's one over there in the southeastern United States, basically Florida, you know, Florida, Georgia, around there, right? So those markers there, same thing as a nuclear reactor. They cost 10. They can be damaged 10, you know, and even 1 point of damage. They're inoperable. You have to have them to build a nuclear bomb. The only difference between those and the reactor is that you don't have to build those in your home country. Like you could just go and take Oslo here. That means you have heavy water, right? So as long as you have heavy water, you can build a nuclear bomb. It doesn't have to be in your home country. And then the last thing is uranium. Now, uranium starts at 5 places on the board. So there's the Western United States, there's Slovakia, Belgian Congo, Ontario, and Eastern Ukraine. Like here's the marker here on Eastern Ukraine, right? Now those are not facilities. Those are mines, right? Uranium mines. You don't just make uranium. You dig it out of the ground. So you have to have one of those territories that has uranium in it in order to build a nuclear bomb. And it's not like you can pick that marker up and take it back to you know, like it's a mine. It doesn't move, right? So you have to be able to get it. Like that one there would be the one that would be out there to grab, right? That one down in Belgian Congo, because there's not much down there. But you look at this one here, that one's guarded pretty good, right? There's one in here, that could be contested, I suppose. And then there's 2 in the United States here. Well, actually, no, there's one in Ontario. Oh, that was a facility there. So here's one over here. There's uranium over here, right? In the Western United States. Anyway, some of them are not very attainable. And that one down in Belgian Congo, that might make that territory, you know, really worth going after, right? So you've gone and you've got all 4 of these technologies or uranium somehow, right? And so you have the ability to build the bomb. And that's this marker right here. Now, just because you have those things, that doesn't mean you have the bomb. You still have to build the bomb. So that's going to cost you 35 IPPs per bomb. Now, you don't put it on the board. What you would do, like if the Russians bought, then you would just put it on your card over here or wherever you're keeping it. So Russia has 1 bomb on them. Like you wouldn't put it out here and somebody comes along and takes it from you. That just isn't going to happen. It's off the board, so nobody can take it from you. You purchased it, it's yours, right? Now, if you were to lose something after that, like say you lost your uranium, right? You couldn't build any more bombs, but you still have that bomb. You didn't all of a sudden lose the uranium in this bomb. You lost the territory that contained your uranium mine, right? Or your research facility or whatever. You still have that bomb, but you're not going to be able to build any more until you get all 4 of those elements back, right? So how do you use it? You purchase them in the production phase and you place them off the board, like I said. Then what they do is, okay, Russia wants to attack somebody. What you would do is you would use a strategic bomber. So here's a strategic bomber. You could also use a heavy bomber, or you could use a jet bomber. Like there's a jet bomber over there in the United States there, right? We'll get to that technology pretty soon. That's pretty cool as well. So let's say you were going to attack this territory here. The Russians, they flew in, dropped the bomb here, okay? So then what you would do is you'd count up the units in there. I think there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 units in there. So what you would do, you would take 8 D12. Now it doesn't say this in the rules, but I've had it clarified for me. You take 8 D12 and you roll them. And you hit on 4 or less. Now it's up to the British player in that case, it's up to the defender to choose the casualties. Like you would roll 8 and maybe you get 4 hits, right? So the defender, they would take off 4 casualties. But they also, the atomic bomb also damages one of your facilities to the maximum amount, right? So whatever your facilities are in there, like you have an air base in here and you have a major factory. Now the major factory can take way more damage than the air base can, right? So I would be inclined to damage the major factory in this case. But like if there was a bunch of planes in here, maybe I'd want to damage the air base just so they couldn't scramble or something. I don't know. Like you'll have to take a look at the situation once you drop the bomb. Which facility do I want to damage? Because damaging the facility is up to the attacker. The defender chooses the combat casualties. The attacker chooses the facility to damage, and you damage it to the maximum extent that you could. You could dump more than one atomic bomb on a territory if you want. So then you would just get twice as many dice to roll, right, and damage two facilities. Um, so it's cumulative that way, right? So once you've dropped a nuclear bomb on a territory, then okay, the bomb's been dropped. So then you put one of these markers on there. That's a radiation marker, and what that means is that this territory here is normally worth 4. So now this territory is only worth 3 for the rest of the game. No matter what happens in the game, this territory is only worth 3. Now, if you were to hit that again with a nuclear bomb, you'd put another marker down there. I'd just stack it on top, and that would mean that that territory is only worth 2. Another marker is only worth 1. So you get it, right? Like every time you drop a bomb on a territory, you reduce its value by 1. A territory like this that doesn't have any value, you wouldn't, like it doesn't go to -1, right? It costs you $1 to own that. That just doesn't work that way. It's the territory has to have some value in order for you to take that value off, right? But I mean, really, like if you're going to drop a nuclear bomb, you're probably going to drop it on a territory that's worth something, because the territories that are worth something are probably strategically important, right? Now, it's the strategic bomber that drops it, like I said. So you would have to make sure that you could make it there and land safely. You can't just go to the maximum extent. Like you have to play by the rules of the game, right? So you have to make sure that you have enough movement points to get there and get back. It doesn't say anything about anti-aircraft guns against that strategic bomber. I'm inclined to say no. Because those type of bombers, they would have dropped the bomb from very, very high up. I don't think that an anti-aircraft gun would have reached them. So I think that a bomber dropping an atomic bomb probably does not get hit by an anti-aircraft gun or the fighters or anything. It's just that's just a special event in the game. It's not a normal strategic bombing raid. It's a nuclear bomb, and I think that it should have its own. Especially when you consider the amount of money you spent acquiring that bomb, like it's a lot of money in the end, right? Then I think that you should be able to drop that bomb, right? So another thing that with these nuclear bombs is that you can force somebody to surrender using the nuclear bomb, because like that's what the Americans did to Japan, right? They dropped 2 bombs on Japan, and they probably saved a lot of lives, because that fight would have went on for who knows, another year or 2, right? And a lot of people would have been killed in the invasion of Japan. That doesn't mean that what they did was humane or anything. Like there was a lot of dead civilians, but I'm just saying, like they probably shortened the war by doing that. But anyway, in this game here, you can also make somebody surrender by dropping the bomb, and those surrender conditions are going to be different than the surrender conditions of the normal ones that you see on your player cards, right? Like France, they get to move their capital here, and these guys get to do this and that and there. But these ones are very specific. So. And so with each atomic bomb dropped on a nation's home territory, it increases the likelihood of surrender, because it's cumulative as well, right? I'll show you how. So when you drop a bomb on a home country, you divide the attack country IPB by 5 and roll a d12 against the remainder. Here, let me just grab a d12 and show you how that would work, okay? Make it a little more visual. So let's take a look here. Let's say instead of attacking that territory there, let's say that where's that bomb of mine? Here it is. Let's say the Russians, they could reach London. They wouldn't have to go to London though. They could go to Scotland if they'd want to, but there's no units to kill there. You might as well go here and try to kill those units, right? So they've gone and they've dropped an atomic bomb on London. So you resolve it like I said. So you would roll for each of the units. You roll a d12 and try to get force, and the defender chooses a casualty. You damage one of the facilities to the max extent that the attacker chooses that. But then the other thing, because it's on a home country, you would roll the dice. Now you look up here, the UK, right there, it says they're at 36, right? So you round that down to 35 because you're dividing by 5. So 35 divided by 5 is 7, right? Now you need to roll higher than a 7, but for every radiation marker, you get to add 1 to your dice roll. So 1 bomb, 1 radiation marker. You could have dumped 2 bombs on there or 3 bombs on there, got that many radiation markers, but you wouldn't get to roll more than once. So you're probably better off hitting it once and then next turn hitting it again, because then you get to roll again, right? If you dump two bombs on there, you still only get to roll once. So we need to roll a 7, but we get a +1. So there we go. 11 plus 1 is 12. That means that the UK surrenders. Now, when you make a nation surrender, in this case, not in the case of the normal conditions, but in this case, you get their money. So the UK would have to give their money to the Russians. Normally that money would have gone to the bank if they would have surrendered by conventional attack, right? Also, you can't create a new capital. There's no creating a new capital. If you surrender because of a nuclear bomb, then you're just plain surrendering. Okay, so you remove all your stuff from the board. Where's my thing? Here, hang on, let me set this up, okay? Okay, so I'm ready now. Now, what happens when the UK surrenders? We're going to carry on with that example. So the home country, you would put the Russian roundel on all 3 territories for the home country there. Take all the British units off. Put the Russian roundels on, and the Russians would get the facilities there, right? You wouldn't replace the units or anything with your own. You would just take the British ones off, and that would be now your territories. Now also, all the other territories that the British originally owned, so those are the ones that you start the game with your own roundel on it, that you're still in possession of. Like if Japan had taken this one, then this one wouldn't count, right? But in this case here, like all of these places here that Britain owns, you would put a Russian roundel on all of those. But let's say at some point in time, somehow, diplomacy or combat, Britain had managed to take in Saudi Arabia there. Russia would not get that one. Instead, what you would do is put it back to Saudi Arabia, and then it would go back into the diplomatic pool. So people could they could use diplomacy to try to get it, or they could attack it themselves if they wanted to, I suppose. Like however you would acquire a territory. But all those other territories that the British owned, they would get these. Now, in the base rules for 36, in regards to the Commonwealth, when the UK surrenders, they all surrender, right? FEC and ANZAC, but not in this game here, not in East versus West. So in East versus West, all 3 powers will be separated if one of them surrenders. But they will still own the technology that they've been developing all game. All those things that they had before, they will still have, right? But like in this case where the UK surrendered, what you do is the first thing you'd have to do, kind of like in the Vichy, when you're resolving the Vichy, you remember you have to roll all the ships. Well, in this one, you would roll for all the ships that of the nation that surrendered because of a nuclear weapon. So in a roll of 1 to 6, you would give that ship to somebody on your own side, like on the British side. So they could give this one to France or to the United States, or I guess they could give it to the FEC or ANZAC. In a roll of 7 or 8, that ship would be scuttled, so this would just come right off the board, right? In a roll of 9 to 12, you would replace the ship with a Russian one, because Russia was the conquering nation. So 9 to 12, the Russians get to steal your ships. So if it was this one here, then you would do it all. Like you would give them the whole fully loaded carrier, right? in the case of, like I said, in the case of FEC, like you wouldn't roll these ships over here for the British if it was the UK that surrendered up there, right? So my question to him was, well, where do you split it? Okay, so on land you would split that right here. So Iran, all of Iran, and everything west of that is UK. All of India here. And I would suggest Afghanistan as well. If the British happen to own Afghanistan, that would, all that east would be FEC territory. And as far as the sea zones go, I have this written down. So sea zone 83 is British. Here, let me just move this back here because we'll see. So sea zone 83, sea zone 119, and this sea zone down here, sea zone 140. So there, and everything west of that is part of the UK. And then all these other ones here, 84, 85, 121, and then these two right here, 141 and 143. So all these here, like this, that is all FEC right there, okay? Here, let me just move this back. So this one and this one, and this one and this one and this one, those are all FEC, and of course, moving out into the Pacific, any ships over there that are British ships would be FEC ships and not UK ships. So that's how you would split that up. And that's the nuclear. It actually is pretty cool, isn't it? Where you develop nuclear bombs and how you drop them and everything. Now, one other thing we talked about is putting this into the regular game. And he said, sure, you know, if you want, you can start the nuclear technology in 1936, but all the players in the game would have to agree to that, right? You know, you can't just, oh, we're going to have nuclear, what? So you can use these rules exactly as I stated to you in the 36 game. It's going to take you a long time in order to develop a bomb, though, because remember, in 36, you're not at wartime income, and it's going to take a while to get up that high and to purchase all those things. So that would be appropriate anyway, right? It would be near the end of the war when you would start doing that. And in fact, you could even say, okay, we can't start the nuclear technology until 1942, or, you know, make up your own rules. But anyway, using these rules for the nuclear technology, if you wanted to put that in the base game, you would just have to buy that set of markers there, and away you go, right? So that would be fun. But what he was saying, though, is that you have to have uranium in order to get the other three things. So you have to have uranium when you're buying the research facility. You have to have uranium when buying the heavy water. You have to have uranium when building the nuclear reactor. Like, you have to have uranium before you do any of those other things. Even if you lost the uranium, you would have to have it, but at the time that you purchase one of those three things, okay? And then bombs can't be purchased until the turn after you acquire the elements. So that's how you would play it in 1936. Anyway, let's get on to the other four technologies. Okay, so the other technologies. Let's start with missiles. Now, missiles are basically what they are is kicked up strategic rockets. So like the next generation or the improved. So they'll work pretty much exactly like a strategic rocket does. So you would have to develop the strategic rocket technology. And there's 4 spaces along the row there to do that, right? Like you look there, number 9 is strategic rockets, right, over there. So you have to go all 4 spaces. And then you would have to go 1 space beyond that. So whatever that last number is, I believe on rockets it's 9. So you would have to do 5 in order to develop missiles. And so you could use tokens for that, or like these things are cheap right here. Doug's coming out with these things here. These are really nice, 3D printed ones. He's going to be having these available, except it's going to have a better base on it. Like this one here falls over pretty easy, but those will be available to use. So the differences between this and strategic rockets is, for one thing, they go 1 extra space. So a strategic rocket in version 2 goes 2 spaces. For the missiles, they will go 3 spaces. So that'll That'll make a big difference. And the other thing is, normally when you were attacking a facility with a strategic rocket, you would do 1d6 of damage. But if you're throwing a missile, you're going to do a d12 of damage. And if you're going to do carpet bombing instead, like you can only do one or the other. So if you decide to do carpet bombing, normally you would roll that at 2, right? Like you would just get 1 die at 2, and you would try to kill something like a military unit. But and there's no defense against it either, right? It's not like you could shoot that down. But with a missile, it's 4. So 4 or less for carpet bombing. Anyway, the facilities cost 8. Each missile itself, like to buy another missile, that's 2. So it's got the AA defense on it, and just like any facility. And I think it can be damaged up to 8, right? And then you pay the damage off if you want to use it again. So the next thing is late armor. Now, these things over here, like this is the Pershing tank, right? So that is your heavy armor for the Americans. Now, late armor is the next progression of your heavy armor. So they're like a medium tank that is big and beefy as well, right? Like that's where tanks started moving, is getting faster and more reliable, and with all the firepower of a heavy tank, right? So there's lots of things available for that to use. So a heavy tank costs you +2 over a medium tank. So Japan is the only one where a medium tank costs 8. Everybody else's cost 6. In other words, Japan would have to pay 10 for a heavy tank, and everybody else would pay 8. Now with the late armor, that is going to cost you +3 over a medium tank. So the late armor is going to be 9 IPP for just about everybody, and 11, I guess, for the Japanese. You probably won't be buying them for the Japanese, right? Just like you didn't buy a lot of tanks in Global War 36 for the Japanese. They're just not very cost effective. Although in the next version of the game, in version 3, those tank costs for the Japanese are going to come down. So lots of options when it comes to buying these things. If like you could use chips, like I've always said, right? Let me just grab a couple chips here. So you got yourself a medium tank. Well, then you've got a heavy tank, right? Well, then you've got a late war tank. You just, whatever color of chips that you decide to use. Or you could buy the sculpts. And because of the America game, there's tons of options. Like this one here is from the America game, and there's a few different American ones. Germans, I mean, geez, there must be like 4 or 5 different options that you can use, and they would be appropriate to use for this purpose as well, because what the pieces from the America game are stuff that were prototypes that were on the drawing board but hadn't been built yet, because that game starts in 1946. Well, guess where this game starts, right? East versus West. It starts around the same time as well, at the end of World War II. So using those tanks from the Bring in the Heavy set for the Japanese or for the Germans or for the Americans, and also now you can get the American pieces in the tan color for the British. So there's all those options there if you wanted to use 3D pieces, and they sell them. You don't have to buy the America game anymore. They just sell them on the HBG site, right? So you could buy them like that. This one here, this is an IS-7. So you got your KV-2, and then the late war would be the IS-7. Now, I bought this one on Shapeways, and it was pretty expensive. It comes from the Russian super weapons expansion set. Like, you had to purchase the stuff from there. But Doug, he's trying to make the cost come down. He's busy with a lot of things, but he is going to make a Russian late war heavy tank available. Could be this one, or it could be an IS-3 or something. I'm not sure what he's going to go with, but he's going to have more options for you available in the near future. So just know that if you wanted to just use your KV-2 and put it on a chip like this for now, knowing that another one's coming out soon, then that's great. Like, he's got a new supplier in Tulsa now to do his 3D printing, and it's a lot cheaper than going through Shapeways, right? Still more expensive than plastic, but a lot cheaper. Anyway, those are your late armor. Oh, I told you about the cost and everything. So the stats on them, like one of these tanks, heavy armor is 8 and 7, right? Like an attack 8 and defense 7, and it's one target selection. But the late war tanks, these ones here, they're going to be 9 and 8. So attack 9, defend 8, and their target selection is going to be 2 or less on armor or vehicle class units or less, right? Like you can't target a plane with them with target selection. So yeah, that's about it. Okay, so then we got late jets. Now here we are. Okay, so these are the American jet fighters, and you can get jet fighters for the Japanese and for the Germans and everything. You can actually get cheap ones for the Japanese. You like 20 or 25 of them for $2, right? And just paint them in the nation's colors if you want. But anyway, I painted this one in the Russian colors for the Russians, but I've also ordered more for this game. I've ordered 2 more packs of them. One's going to be for the Americans, and one's are going to be for the British, because I've got these things from the America game. Now these are going to be my late war fighters, or late war jets, I mean, and then I'll have also regular jets. Then this comes from the same set as I was telling you about, that Russian tank on Shapeways. Again, pretty expensive, but this is a MiG-9, really nice sculpt. But anyway, that'll be my late war jet. So these the stats on these things, now these are pretty good. Normally a jet would cost you 12 IPP in the version 2 game, right? Well, these ones here are going to cost you 14, but they're going to attack at 9, defend at 9. The interception value is going to be 6, so that's pretty powerful, right? And the other thing is their base movement is going to be 5. That's more than any other plane of that class, right? Like a fighter or tactical bomber type of plane. Normally the planes only go 4, so 5 to start with. If you're at an air base, that's 6, and if you have long-range aircraft, that's 7, right? So there you go. Now, in order to develop those, you have to have jet aircraft, right? Or jet technology. So you go to jet technology, and then just like the missiles, you go one past that, right? Like you have to roll a 5th number, successful number, and I believe it's 8 for jet aircraft. I forgot about the heavy armor as well. Heavy armor, you had to go 1 extra space with that too, and that's an 8. So you'd have to roll an 8, a 5th successful roll. So then the jet aircraft as well. Now, again, lots of options because of the America game. Like you look at this one. Why wouldn't you use this one for your late jet, right? I mean, look at that thing. I've been waiting to put one of these things in my game where it wouldn't feel weird. You know, nobody else has got one, so you feel stupid about using it. But in this game here, where it's gone past 1945, now these things, like, they actually found one of these in a barn. Like they started making one, like a prototype. It was made out of wood, right? So they actually found one of these. I've seen a documentary on it. Anyway, these things were going to be developed by the Germans, right? So that will be my late war jet fighter for the Germans. Now the last thing is the heavy jet bombers. So these are heavy bombers that are jet powered, right? So you're going to have heavy bomber technology, long-range aircraft technology, and jet technology. But then the heavy bomber technology, you're going to have to go 1 space further on that. Just like the other things, you had to go 1 space further. Now, some of these nations, depending on your scenario, it tells you right in the thing there that these are the technologies that you've researched and developed all game. Some of them are fully developed. Some of them you're on stage 3 or 4 or whatever, right? So like in this scenario here, Pluto, the Americans already have a jet bomber, a jet heavy bomber on the board. And the Russians and the Americans, I can see, and the British, they have the the late war jet fighters on the board. The Russians have the late war tanks on the board. So you might have already started with these technologies, right? Which is cool. But if you don't have them, that's how you would develop them. And again, like you would have 3 bombers then, right? Like there's your Axis and Allies bomber. He'd be your regular bomber, strategic bomber. Then you could use one of the America bombers, or I think they actually have some kind of heavy bomber that you can buy at HBG. And then, of course, you're going to use this one, just like the other one, right? Oh, yeah, that's going to be my late war bomber right there. Anyway, so what do? You would use 5 dice with these. So you could bomb somebody back to the Stone Age if you're doing a strategic bombing run. You would use 5d12 and you would bomb the living crap out of somebody. Or you could carpet bomb somebody with 5 dice and you'd be rolling at 2, right? Trying to take units out, like just regular combat units. And the interception value on these is a 2. So if they're attacked and their defense is 4, now they're going to move 10. So that's 10 without any long-range aircraft or airbase, right? So that's a long ways. And then cost is 18, so big cost on them. But bear in mind that in version 3 of the rules, the costs of jet fighters, the cost of the bombers is going to come down a little bit because, like the heavy bombers, I mean, because the cost of the capital ships are coming down. So you can't really have a heavy bomber costing more than a battleship, right? Like a battleship gets 2 shots a shot at 10 on offense and defense, takes 2 hits to sink it, and then you're going to charge the same for a heavy bomber that doesn't do nearly as much. It doesn't seem right. So of course the cost of the heavy bomber is going to come down in version 3 of the rules. Anyway, so that is all the technologies. We're going to get into Partisans next. All right, let's get into Partisans now. Now the Partisan rules in this are not going to be exactly the same as they are in the Partisan expansion set. There are a few differences, but it is recommended that you use these the Partisan set in this because here, let me just read to you what it says here. That says it better than I could. It says all scenarios from July 1945 should apply these Partisan rules. They are an optional but critical component to the time period. During each player's collect income and place units phase, that player may make a Partisan generation roll for each territory that was captured and remains captured while under their possession or control. This could include A territory from a player's home country that was captured, B, a territory from a nation that was aligned and subsequently captured, or C, a territory of a neutral that was controlled at time of capture, and or D, a territory designated in Table 10.7. So Table 10.7 is the one that you see in on page 16 of your rules. Like here, this would be taken from Table 10.7. This is on the card here. So that's what they say, and I'm not going to read them all off. Like you can read just as well as I can, I hope. And anyway, I'll get into it a little bit, but I'm not going to read them all off. So how do you generate them? A player rolls 1d12 and succeeds on a roll of 10 or higher. Like normally in the game, in the Partisan rules, you would have to hit a 12 or higher. But depending, like there were certain instances where you could roll this or that or whatever. But in this game here, you're going to need to roll a 10 or higher. And then there are some special cases like that table I just showed you. There's some special things on there. And then when you place them, as soon as the player succeeds in a partisan generation roll, place a partisan of that nation's color in the occupied zone. The placing player is the controller of the partisan. The presence of enemy units does not affect placement. So, and also, like if your country is surrendered for any reason, your partisans don't surrender. They're still going to be a pain in the ass to the people that are still in the game. Okay, so what they do doesn't cost anything, of course. They're generated by rolling the dice. They have attack of 0, so they're not going to attack anybody. They have a defense of 1, and they don't move. There's no way that they move. The impact of them, it's like in the partisan set, there was a bunch of things that they could do, but that's been pared down. It's been simplified for this game, right? Because it's part of the game itself. So a partisan prohibits the tracing of a supply path or strategic rail movement through the zone unless there is at least one opposing infantry class unit present for each partisan. So like you see here, there's a Russian partisan here, right? And there's rail going through here. So because there is one infantry matched with one partisan, the French could still rail through here. But if this guy wasn't here, if it was like that, then the French would not be able to rail through here because the partisan unit without the infantry unit in there negates the ability to. So if you had 2 partisans and 1 infantry, then that would also negate the ability to strategic rail through that or to trace the supply path through that territory. So opposing units may only roll 1 attack against a partisan unit. Failure results in both units occupying the same territory. So this dude here could attack this dude here, but if he misses on the first shot, oh well, that's it. There's only 1 round of combat, so both of them are going to be in that territory. So now also, if this guy is in here uncontested, so if he's in there by himself, nothing else in there except for maybe facilities like that, then he's going to negate the income for this territory. This territory is normally worth 1 to France. In this case here, this territory would be worth 0. And that doesn't matter if it's worth 10 or 1. That income goes to 0 unless there is some type of unit in there for the country that owns that territory. So partisans in territories outside of the home country, for example, Cuba for the USSR, may be attacked without a declaration of war against the major nations. So France could attack this guy here if they wanted to without declaring war against the Russians. I don't know if they're at war in this scenario. I haven't got into it yet. But if you're playing a scenario where France is not at war with Russia, you don't have to declare war in order to attack a partisan. You could just basically slap him around because the Russians don't even know he's there probably, right? He's just a guy that likes communism. So transforming them. Now this is different, and it's going to be changed for version 3 as well. So 2 partisans controlled by the same nation may form an infantry unit. Like in the normal rules, you form a militia, and in version 3, they're going to go back to forming a militia as well. But in this game here, version 2, you're going to form an infantry unit when you combine 2 partisans. So communist partisans outside the USSR or CCP home country may be converted to infantry and declare war against the minor, providing income to the major nation if necessary. They may also be attacked by any major Western power, even if the major power is not at war with the USSR or CCP. The Western nation does not incur a declaration of war penalty. So again, like I just said, but what it's saying here is that if this guy is outside of their home country, whether he's a CCP or a Russian, that you don't have to combine them, that one of them could make an infantry and declare war against this guy if he wanted to, right? So if this guy wasn't here and you turn him into an infantry, then Russia would take that territory, wouldn't it? To me, that's what that says. Anyway, but look at him though. He is a sneaky little bastard. He's standing behind this guy. He's going to shoot him in the grenade. So, you can't trust those guys. So elimination. A partisan is removed if the territory is conquered by a member of the alliance that controls the partisan, and is not removed if controlled by a different alliance. CCP partisans are always converted 1-to-1 to infantry when the territory is eliminated or is liberated by the USSR. So if the Russians are going into China after the Civil War is over, and there's a CCP partisan there, then they get to automatically convert that to an infantry unit, a CCP infantry unit. So that's it for the partisans, except for the special generation zones. I'll just read you the first one. It says here the United States, UK, France, ANZAC home countries automatically place one partisan on one of every 4 territories held by an enemy nation, minimum of 1 location. So in other words, you wouldn't have to roll for it. That's what it suggests to me. If somebody's in your home territory, then you get a partisan automatically, right? And it says the same thing in the next one for the USSR. 1 partisan for every 4 territories held by an enemy nation, minimum of 1 location. So the minimum of 1 location, to me, suggests that if even just 2 of your territories, home territories, are held, you get to place 1 partisan, right? Automatically, you wouldn't roll for them. And then there's a few other things like what happens in China, French Indochina, a bunch of other places, Warsaw, Hungary. You can read that when you're playing the game. It's really clear how it states it there. So anyway, the next thing and the last thing to get to is diplomacy. Okay, so we're looking at the diplomacy chart in 1945. As you can see here, just about everything is already taken, right? In 1945, like here's one for the Americans that's done. There's 1 strict neutral over here. There's 1 over here that's the British player has inside track on. There's 1 over here that's almost taken. All these other ones are taken. There's 1 and 2 here that are almost taken. There's another strict neutral there, Switzerland. But most of them have already been taken, as you would expect, right? In the 1945 starting point. Let me just flip it over here and get the 1946 starting. So here's the 1946 side, and as you can see, there's a ways to go on just about all of them now, right? So that's the difference between 45 and 46. I guess probably because the war it's been a year now, and nations have gone their own ways again, right? And then all of a sudden 46 comes along, and now you're going to have to gather their support all over again, right? Because it's a completely different war. Rather than being a continuation of the same war, World War II, this is going to be a new war. And that, of course, is only the one scenario, right? Operation Pluto. So anyway, I just did a video on diplomacy, and it's really easy to play. All the major nations get to play. And basically what it is you start on N, you know, if you don't already have a marker there, right on here. You start on N, and you pay 1 IPP to roll. If you roll a 1 to 2, then you get off neutral, right? And then once you're off neutral, then you need to roll a 1 to 3 to get to the next stage, and then to the next stage, right? And once you're at that stage, then you get whatever that is. So Argentina, and I think there's 3 territories in Argentina. So you would get all 3 of those territories. The money would go to you, right? And there's bumping back and forth. If you really want to get into the diplomacy, then just check out the video I did on diplomacy. That was another one of Robert Hatcher's expansion sets. Really well done. But now you're going to want to know this, and this is a change not only for this, but also for the diplomacy expansion. Robert plays the expansion set all of the time, and what he's found is that it's not really fair to the Allies and the Russians, because what it said in the rules was that you had to be at wartime income in order to start doing that, right? In order to start influencing people. So what happens was the Russians and the Germans and the Japanese could just run around and scoop up all the neutrals, right? Because they're already at wartime. Like, there's no such thing as wartime income for them, right? They can declare war at any time they want. It's the other guys who can't declare war until they reach a certain threshold, right? So all the good places were gone by the time the Allies and the Russians got to even try to influence it. So The new rule is all you have to do is be a major power. And starting in 1936, you can play the diplomacy game. So you don't have to wait anymore. Now that goes for East versus West, and it goes for the diplomacy expansion. And that comes right from the guy that invented the diplomacy expansion. So you don't have to wait anymore being at wartime income. So there you go. That's the diplomacy part of it. And again, that part is just like the partisans. That is recommended that you play that. And I'm going to now that I've finished this video, I'm going to upload it. This is actually the second time I did this video because I did it once and I made it private just so that just Robert and I could see it. I wanted to get his take on that, find out what the mistakes I made were. And I did make a couple, and so I redid it, and this is the redo. But that's okay though, because the second time I went through it, it actually flowed a lot better. I think the video is going to end up being shorter because of that, and more accurate, obviously. Like that's the whole point. And so when I do the rules for version 3, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the video, make it private. Have the rules guy go watch the video and say, yep, that's good, or nope, you made a mistake, and so I'll just go ahead and remake that video because I want everybody to learn how to play this game the right way. When I did version 2 rules, I just said, hey, I don't know how to play this game, let's learn together. So it was okay to monkey around because I didn't know what I was doing either, but now I do. And now I have no excuse for making bad videos or making videos with bad information. So all of the information in this video is certified correct. And if you have any questions, just ask me down in the comment section and I will answer them. Or I will ask Robert and Robert will give me the information and then I will get back to you. So that's it for this, and there will be more videos in this series of East versus West playing the scenarios. But this is the base rules. Now, take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade out.